In a small mining town, deep in the heart of colonial Africa, a young woman named Aminata walked the dusty streets, her beauty drawing the eyes of every man she passed. But Aminata was no ordinary woman. She was a prostitute, selling her body to survive in this harsh world. Though desired by many, she lived a life filled with self-hatred and bitterness. On the other side of town, a humble farmer named Kwame tilled his fields, his calloused hands working the soil as he had done for as long as he could remember. As the sun began to set, Kwame kneeled and uttered a simple prayer. "Lord, please send me a wife to share my life." The next day, as Kwame made his way to the town market, he caught sight of Aminata walking alone. In that moment, his heart was struck by her beauty, and he knew she was the answer to his prayer. He approached her, clearing his throat nervously. "Miss, I don't rightly know your name, but I must speak true. From the moment I laid eyes on you, I knew you were meant to be my wife. Will you do me the great honor of marrying me?" Aminata was taken aback by the boldness of this stranger. She studied him suspiciously, his rough hands and humble clothes marking him as just a simple farmer. A laughing scorn rose in her throat, but she choked it back, remaining aloof. "You're going to have to do better than that if you want my favors, old man," she said flatly before brushing past him. As Aminata walked away, flashes of memory gripped her mind, revealing the painful truth of how she came to be this person. Her real name was Ada. As a child, she had overheard her father Malu saying she should never have been born. Malu was already married to a woman named Jahina, but Ada's mother Nasira was his mistress. When Nasira became pregnant with Ada, Malu forced her out, refusing to support her financially. Desperate, Nasira turned to prostitution to survive, but she became deathly ill. On her sickbed, she begged the young Ada to keep her faith, but the girl's heart had already turned cold from the cruelty she witnessed. After Nasira's death, her pimp saw the opportunity to exploit poor Ada, selling her at only 8 years old to a vicious man named Bukuru. He wasted no time stripping her of her real name and identity, renaming her Aminata and forcing her into prostitution. For years, she was trapped in this nightmare, suffering horrific abuse. One night, when Aminata was a teenager, one of her customers turned out to be her own father Malu, who had relocated to the mining town and become a wealthy businessman. He did not recognize his own daughter in the prostitute before him. But when Aminata realized who he was, she vengefully seduced him, repaying the pain he had inflicted on her and her mother. The next morning when Malu learned the truth, the shame crushed his soul, and he took his own life. His death created the opportunity for Aminata to finally escape from Bukuru's clutches. She fled, traveling to the mining town in hopes of starting a new life. But arriving penniless and alone, she quickly fell back into the only way of life she knew, once again selling her body on the streets to survive. And so her path crossed with the farmer Kwame, who was captivated by her beauty but knew nothing of her inner torment and tragic past. When Aminata refused his proposal of marriage, Kwame was undeterred. He began frequenting the brothel where she worked, trying fruitlessly each time to convince her to leave with him. Aminata remained coldly indifferent no matter what he said or promised. But one fateful night, a violent brawl erupted at the brothel between customers. Aminata, caught in the middle, was beaten viciously by the brutal establishment's guards before they finally restored order. As she lay battered and bleeding, the guards prepared to discard her body like worthless garbage. It was then that Kwame raced in, throwing himself at her broken form, shielding her from further harm as he begged the guards, tears streaming down his face. "You cannot discard this woman, for she is to be my wife." The oddity of this simple farmer claiming a prostitute made the guards roar with laughter. But they agreed to let Kwame take the unmoving Aminata away in exchange for all the money he had. Kwame gently carried Aminata's limp body through the streets, bringing her to his modest hut on the farm. He tended patiently to her injuries for weeks, somehow keeping her clinging to life despite her grievous wounds. When Aminata finally regained consciousness, she was stunned to find herself in Kwame's humble home, nursed back from the brink of death by his caring hands. Before she could utter a word, Kwame spoke softly. "You are my wife now, Aminata. I care not what has happened before. My heart yearns only for you." Aminata was dumbfounded by this man's pure love for her, a whore who had sold herself countless times over. She remained icy and aloof, unable to comprehend or accept such devotion. Part of her still expected that when she regained her strength, he would take his marital rights and use her body as every other man had. But the weeks passed, and Kwame never once laid a hand on her, treating her with gentle reverence and doting on her emotional and physical healing. The simple farmer made no secret of his pure love and desire for Aminata to be his wife in truth. This was too much for the world-weary Aminata to accept. The first chance she got while regaining her strength, she fled Kwame's farm, disappearing into the night. She had no plan, only knowing she could not allow herself to trust this strange man's professed love and fear of being trapped in another nightmare. Aminata wandered for days, falling into despair at her cursed existence. Just when she began to resign herself to ending her miserable life, Kwame found her. Wild with joy and relief, he scooped her up and carried her home, weeping tears of gratitude for her safety. "Why do you hunt for me and insist on making me your wife?" Aminata demanded once they returned to the farm. "You know the life I have lived. I am nothing but a worthless whore." Kwame pulled her close, firmness in his voice. "That life is over now, Aminata. You belong here with me as my wife, as my love and partner to share all that God has given us. I will love you with everything I am until my last breath." It was the most beautiful vow Aminata had ever witnessed. After so many years of abuse, hatred and pain from men, some kernel of hope flickered in her heart. Perhaps she could trust this uncommon farmer whose love seemed to have no bounds or expectations. And so, she resolved to try and embrace her new life with Kwame on the humble farm. Day by day, she allowed the ice around her heart to thaw a little more. She learned the simple chores of milling grain, cooking humble meals over the fire, and tending to the small crop of vegetables that supplemented their diet. For the first time, she experienced what it felt like to be valued, respected, and cherished as Kwame's equal partner. Yet part of her still held back from fully opening her heart. The old fears and self-loathing ingrained from years of abuse were difficult to shed. And whenever Kwame spoke wistfully of being blessed with children someday, Aminata felt a cold dread. She had been basically a child herself when she first suffered the brutality of men. She was almost certain those violations had left her barren and unable to have children. When Kwame's childless brother-in-law Jomo came to visit one day, Aminata decided it was time to leave again, convinced Kwame would be better off without her inability to bear him an heir. She waited until Kwame went to take his turn guarding the mining operation, then spoke to Jomo about getting a ride away from the farm. "I'll give you a ride," Jomo agreed gruffly, "but you'll have to pay the toll for a woman of your reputation." He eyed her salaciously. Aminata felt a wave of nausea and dread, but she nodded numbly. If prostituting herself one more time was the price to leave Kwame's life, she would pay it to ensure his happiness. After the vile act, Jomo gave her a ride back to the mining town. his scornful laughter ringing in her ears as she fled from the wagon. Disoriented and awash in shame, Aminata instinctively found herself drawn back to the only place she knew, the burned-out husk of the former brothel. When she requested from the owner, a vicious woman known only as the Madam, the pouch of mining gems owed to Aminata from her time working there, the cruel Madam slapped her and spat at her feet. "You were a worthless whore then, and you're a worthless whore now," the Madame sneered. "Now get out of my sight before I have my guards toss you in the street." Dejected and penniless, Aminata resigned herself to the only way she knew to get by: prostitution. She propositioned the owner of a dingy mining town bar, trading her body for a hovel to sleep in and some scraps of food. This was the wretched existence she found herself in when Kwame finally tracked her down weeks later. He was aghast and wept bitter tears at seeing the wife he loved falling back into such depravity. "Aminata, what have you done? Why did you leave me?" he cried, pulling her into his arms. "You deserve better than a barren woman like me as a wife," she replied, aching voice laced with self-loathing. "I can give you no children to inherit your lands and continue your name. I was born a curse." Kwame gently brushed the tangled hair from her face, his calloused hands cradling her cheeks as he stared into her haunted eyes. "You are no curse, Aminata. You are the breath of life and love in my world. I want no other bride, no other woman to share my life and my heart with than you. We can build our family together through the children God chooses to bless us with, or by taking them in from the cruelties of this world as you were once suffering. But I will accept no life where you are not by my side as my partner, my equal, and my loved wife." In that moment, Aminata's stony wall of self-protection began to crumble. She collapsed against Kwame's broad chest, finally allowing herself to weep the lifetime of tears she had bottled inside. Kwame just held her, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words of unconditional love and acceptance. So she left behind her sordid career in prostitution once more, and returned to the humble frontier of the farm, opening her heart more to the warm devotion of the steadfast Kwame. There, they began to build their life together as a genuine couple. Aminata finally knew true partnership and having a voice, as Kwame patiently taught her to read, write, and handle the farm's finances alongside him. She took great pride in putting those rudimentary skills to use, acting as his true equal in the running of their little homestead. Whenever Aminata was able to earn a bit of money from selling eggs or vegetables at the mining town's market, she stashed it away in secret, saving up a modest nest egg over the years. She knew exactly what she would use that money for when the time came. As the seasons passed, their marriage blossomed from respect into a deep intimacy, and eventually, Kwame's tremendous love and patience shattered the last of Aminata's barriers. She realized she was truly, deeply in love with this man, in a way she had never even thought possible given the life of abuse and violation she had endured. But her fears of being unable to bear children persisted until one joyous winter day when she realized she had missed her monthly bleeding. She was pregnant. When she shared the incredible news with Kwame, the farmer was beside himself with elation, scooping Aminata up and swinging her about with radiant joy. "I knew God would bless us, beloved," he shouted amidst her squeals and his boisterous laughter. "He has given us this wondrous gift of new life to christen our little family." As her belly swelled in the warmth of that summer's sun, Aminata glowed with a serenity and sense of wholeness she had never experienced. She was transformed into a radiant, nurturing mother. her heart overflowing as she eagerly awaited the birth of her child. When the big day finally arrived and she delivered a healthy baby boy, Kwame was at her side, weeping tears of joy as he cradled their precious newborn son to his chest. That night, as Aminata lay exhausted, she watched in awe as Kwame tenderly fed the baby, his calloused hands ever so gently cradling the tiny life they had created together. As the years passed, little Kwasi grew into a rambunctious and lively child who adored both his mother and father. Aminata continued selling produce at the mining town market, though she squirreled away most of her earnings to grow her secret nest egg further. Then, when Kwasi was 5 years old, Aminata became pregnant again, and she gave birth to a beautiful daughter they named Adeya. Kwame and Aminata's modest frontier farm was abundant with the love, laughter and energy of their 2 children. As their kids frolicked about in the sunshine, Aminata experienced a sense of sublime bliss and belonging. She never could have imagined in her darkest years of abuse and self-loathing. This was the indomitable power of Kwame's pure and unconditional love for her. He had willed her to see the beauty of her own life, the light through the shadows, and the possibility of hope, no matter how deeply it seemed buried. Amadou's steadfastness and nurturing patience allowed the seeds of self-acceptance and inner healing to slowly blossom within Aminata. Yet, the fears and demons from her past would constantly lurk in the recesses of her mind and heart, reminding her of her unworthiness and haunting her with the crushing guilt of keeping the full truth of her past from the husband she cherished so dearly. On one seemingly ordinary evening after the children were tucked into bed, Aminata could no longer keep the torrent held back. She fell to her knees before Kwame, grasping his strong hands as hot tears streamed down her face. "Kwame, my love, I can no longer live with this deceit," she began brokenly. "I have not been fully honest with you about my former life, my identity." For the first time since she had known him, Kwame's eyes hardened slightly, and his mouth pressed into a stern line. But he placed his hand tenderly on her bowed head. "Tell me everything, beloved. I promise to love you without condition, and I will hold true to that vow." And so Aminata purged her soul of the agony, revealing the depths of violation and torment she had endured from childhood. She explained being sold into prostitution at only 8 years old by her own family's pimp. She told of her true name being Ada, and how she had sunken so low as to vengefully seduce her own father, who did not recognize her, as a twisted act of vengeance before his suicide. As Aminata spoke, waves of revulsion, horror and rage passed over Kwame's face, his jaw tightening and fists clenching. But he did not stop her or turn away, accepting her soul-bearing confession until there was nothing left hidden. When she finally fell silent, Kwame pulled Aminata into his powerful embrace, his tears mingling with hers. "My love, my poor brave love," he murmured into her hair in a choked voice. "I knew the agony you have suffered. I could see it in your eyes from the first moment we met. Yet the strength of your spirit to have endured and prevailed over such abominable misery. You are the Lord's most precious incarnation of resilience and hope on this earth." He tilted her face upwards to stare deeply into her wet eyes. "Nothing, not even the most horrific violations humans can inflict on one another, can make me regret choosing you as my wife and life's partner. Your honesty and trust in me has only fortified the roots of my love and devotion." Aminata felt as if an immense invisible burden had been lifted from her body and soul in that moment. She melted against her husband in relief and gratitude for his loving understanding. No longer did she have to hide her true identity or bury the past. Over the next few years, Aminata and Kwame's family expanded both from additional children born to them and orphans they adopted from the nearby mining town and tribal villages, all people facing some form of displacement or tragedy. Their humble frontier farm became a bustling homestead filled with the chaos of many children's laughter and abundant love. As much as Kwame treasured his growing family, Aminata knew he still longed for something more, a legacy to pass on to his children and grandchildren. His meager frontier farm, while sufficient to feed them all, would not be enough of an inheritance. It was then that Aminata revealed to Kwame the small fortune in gemstones and mining profits she had squirreled away over the years from her work in the market. She had been diligently saving to provide a future for their family that her husband could never achieve through farming alone. Kwame was stunned by her planning and foresight. With those funds, they would have enough capital to invest in expanding the farmland, purchasing equipment, livestock and supplies to grow their humble operation into a large-scale agricultural endeavor. Kwame instantly set to work, tirelessly applying all his skills and labor to make the most of Aminata's nest egg. Within a few years, their hard-scrabble frontier farm had blossomed into a vast and profitable ranch and crop operation. The gemstones were invested in equipping their farm with modern machinery, tools, and sturdy new buildings for housing the growing family and ranch staff. As the farm flourished and expanded, generating a comfortable surplus of profits each year, Kwame turned his attention to the neighboring town that had sprung up around the mining operation. He began investing in local businesses, infrastructure and housing for the influx of workers and their families. Soon, Kwame's vision and leadership transformed the dusty mining outpost into a thriving town with schools, hospitals, and a booming trade economy. His fair and generous treatment of workers, from miners to ranch hands, earned him widespread respect and admiration. When the opportunity arose to incorporate as a city, the people unanimously elected Kwame to take the reins of power as the first mayor. Through it all, hard-working Aminata was at Kwame's side as his closest advisor and confidant in business matters as she was in life. The fortune she had saved allowed them to build an empire from the humblest of beginnings, entirely through ethical ventures that created opportunities for the whole community to benefit and prosper alongside the family. While she deflected credit, Aminata took tremendous pride in the role she played, going from prostitute to co-architect of an entire town's fruition and growth. When their eldest son Kwasi came of age, she personally trained him in the management of the family's myriad assets and operations, with the intent that he would eventually inherit the reins of leadership from his father. Just as Aminata knew the pain of being sold into exploitation at childhood's tender age, her mission was to ensure no other young girls would have to endure a similar terror. A portion of the family's wealth was allocated to establish shelters, schools and support services to rescue and rehabilitate girls who had fallen victim to human trafficking and the criminal underworld of prostitution and abuse that still ran rampant in some parts of colonial Africa. Aminata personally oversaw these initiatives, working directly with the young women who had nowhere else to turn, just as she herself had been so many decades ago. She counseled them through the pain, helped them regain their dignity, and equipped them with education and vocational skills to reintegrate into society with confidence. Hundreds of girls' lives were spared and reclaimed, thanks to Aminata's empathetic nurturing and compassion. When Kwame finally stepped back from public civic leadership, as an elderly man, he and Aminata decided to return to their original frontier homestead for their twilight years, leaving the reins of the family's enterprises to their grown children and grandchildren. As the couple watched the sun set over the vast agricultural lands they had cultivated and developed, Kwame pulled his wife close, basking in the warm evening glow together. He kissed her wrinkled cheek tenderly. "Do you remember when we first met, beloved?" he murmured. A humble farmer and a woman trapped in a life of pain and despair she could scarcely escape. Never could I have imagined we would build such an abundant life from those torn beginnings. Aminata rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes shining with pure contentment. It was your boundless love and patience that reclaimed my very soul, Kwame. You saw the worthiness in me that I could not see in myself back then. Without your steadfast heart, I would have remained lost forever. She turned her face upwards to gaze at him adoringly. Thank you for giving me a life, a family, and a purpose I once thought impossible for someone like me who had been so deeply violated. You showed me that no amount of cruelty and misery can doom us, as long as we nurture hope and love, even through the darkest of times. Kwame caressed her cheek, eyes glistening with adoration for his wife and partner of so many decades. The gift was beholding the resilience and radiant spirit you revealed, piece by piece, as I had the blessing of sharing each year with you. You brought light into my life, just as surely as I brought you back from the shadows. As the couple embraced under the fading African sunset, they embodied the purest triumph of the human spirit, to take unfathomable pain and violation and allow it to reveal an even more brilliant radiance of hope, purpose, and love. Their eternal partnership was the beacon shining through life's inevitable darknesses to illuminate the way towards healing, perseverance, and the reclamation